Hello, my name's Fliss Bennee and I co-chair the Technical Advisory Group, which is the emergency scientific and technical advisory group for the Welsh Government for COVID-19. I attend SAGE as a full member and we are SAGE for Wales really. The Technical Advisory Group advises the Chief Medical Officer and also the First Minister and the wider Cabinet with the latest evidence that's been considered and interpreted with consensus in Wales and often across the whole of the UK. We're very fortunate that the Cabinet and the First Minister listen very carefully to all of the evidence we have and are accepting when the evidence changes. COVID-19 is a really new disease and we're learning new things about it every day. One of the things that's really important to understand is that there are 3 different ways that you can transmit this virus. There's by contact, we call those fomites, and that's something that you can take by touching something where someone else has gone and then touching your face, your nose, your eyes, and inhale the virus through water droplets. The heavy droplets, full grown, probably about 2 meters, adult is the size that we use to test, will exhale water droplets somewhere between 1.5 and 1.8 to 2 meters. Which is one of the reasons why the 2 meters has come into our safety guidance so much. And then there's airborne aerosol. That's particles of the virus down to about 5 nanometers usually, which are light enough to be carried in the air and around. And that's why it's so much more dangerous to be in a poorly ventilated indoor area. We've learned a lot about what kills the virus. Sunlight overwhelmingly does that. One of the reasons why it's so much safer to be outdoors is that the half-life can be measured in minutes in an outdoor environment instead of in hours. That will change as we get into winter. It hates the warm, it loves cold environments, it loves slightly damp environments, and so everything we do to prepare ourselves for winter needs to be based around what's going to be safer for people but a hostile environment for the virus. One of the things we've been talking about in terms of schools is whether or not we can understand if children transmit more, less or the same amount as adults. And in the last couple of weeks there have been a whole load of peer-reviewed documents that have come in journals like The Lancet, as well as in our wider international studies from other countries around the world sharing information between us. And we now know that children probably transmit and receive the virus about half as much or less. So we use something, you may have heard of antibody testing. We use antibody testing to find out whether somebody has had the virus by looking to see if they've developed antibodies that fight against it. We don't know whether having antibodies in your system makes you immune, but we do know that it's likely that you've had the virus if you have those antibodies. And we use that to test what part of the population has had it already. We call that seroprevalence. And in our country, in the UK and in Wales, we know that the seroprevalence generally is about 5%. We've been doing antibody tests on teachers as well as on healthcare populations. We've tested sort of over 6,000 or 7,000 teachers at this point, and roughly their seroprevalence is about 5%. So about 1 in 20 teachers, just like 1 in 20 adults in the wider population, has already had COVID-19. Now, if we compare that with children, in Spain they did a study of about 600,000 members of the public, and they found that children were about half as likely. The seroprevalence in children under the age of 18 was about 3%. I compare this to 5 to 6% prevalence in the population as a whole. In the Netherlands, children under the age of 12 are actually only about 0.5%, and children 13 to 18, 1.3%, compared to a seroprevalence of 3% in the adult population. So we know also that where a child is the index case, where a child is the case that infected people, the people who've become infected have had a less severe instance of the virus. And this is really good news because it means although we know children do transmit a bit, the likelihood is that if you get infected from a child, you will have a less severe episode of the virus. When we take together all of the information that we've found out about the effect that it has on children and the effect that children can have if they're infected, we find mostly that the children who have been infected have only been infected by someone in their household at home, a parent or a guardian. And that means that it really is much safer now to consider opening up schools back with 100% of children present in September. It's going to still need some behaviours that need to be changed. We still need to have good hygiene, and it's going to be a sliding scale. we're fairly certain that we are going to see a resurgence of the virus. We hope it's not going to be a resurgence in what we saw in March when we had to go to a full national lockdown. In fact, everything we're studying and everything we're preparing for is about making sure that we don't end up back in that situation again. It does mean that there are going to be incidents. Hopefully we'll know where a virus outbreak has occurred, and hopefully it won't go into the general community. But there's going to be times when probably every school at some point over the next 6 to 12 months is going to be in a situation where there's a local incident, and some children that are associated with it, who have got families who have tested positive or who have become sick, are going to have to work from home for a little while. But hopefully, when the general risk is low in the community and in the local area, the school will be able to act almost as normal. Antibody testing is one of the 2 types of tests we do. The other one, the PCR test, the real-time PCR test, which is sometimes called the antigen test, that's a test to see if you have the virus now. It tends only to be effective during a short period when you are infectious. So if you think you had it a few weeks ago, that's not going to help. It means that if you've got an antibody positive, you might have been infected at any time in the past. But if you're PCR positive, it means you're likely to be infectious now, and that's when you need to be isolating. The problem is that although this is useful if you think you've got it, so if you've got symptoms, and you should be isolating if you have symptoms until such time as you get a negative test. If you're contact traced, then you're likely to need a test to make sure that you haven't got it unknowingly. But the prevalence in the country at the moment is so low, could be as low as 66 new cases per million. That's less than 200 cases a day, compared to a peak of 4,000 or 5,000 cases a day, which was vast. The testing sensitivity and the specificity, that's how many false positives and how many true positives we get, come into play. So if you're talking about something which is 99% sensitive, the likelihood is that you will get 1 false result for every 99 true results. Now that's great if you're expecting to find 50 positives and 50 negatives. But if you've only got 1 in 10,000 or even 1 in 50,000 people who've actually got it, testing asymptomatically is going to lead you to get far more positive results which are actually false positives. And that can lead to people being told to stay at home unnecessarily. It can lead to fear, and it can lead to an unnecessary amount of contact tracing, when really we should be able to find out where the virus has come from and lock it down before it starts to outbreak into the community. And that's why the Technical Advisory Group is not advocating or full-time PCR testing for people who are not symptomatic, unless there's a good cause like a recent incident or outbreak. Having run the modelling and considering the transmission levels, we're happy to say that you could probably segment classes, certainly in primary school, down to a whole class year. The likelihood is that you could do that with class years all the way up to the end of secondary school, to 16 to 18. You will need to consider for those older children whether they've got a weekend job, whether they're doing work placements or anything that's going to bring them into an adult environment where there could be infection. We've worked out that in order to stay safe, older children probably 14 and up, who are slightly more likely to get the disease, probably need to cut their contacts by about half. So for an average person who has maybe 20 very close contacts, they might need to bring that down to 10. 10 contacts per person that can come close will probably be enough to keep children safe. Teachers will need to consider as well how they're interacting with classes. And obviously, if a teacher is vulnerable, particularly to COVID-19, then they might have to consider how they're going to make sure that they segment with not too many different groups of children at the same time. There's been a lot of people asking me about what the best way to mitigate is. We've really come up with a 3-step calculation for being able to ease away from these very severe things. And that's COVID secure, plus behaviour, plus contact tracing equals easements. What do I mean by that? Well, the Health and Safety Executive has been developing a mitigation assessment, a risk assessment around being COVID secure. That's all the things that you do in your school or in your education establishment to be able to make sure that staff and children and parents can be safe. But that's not going to work unless you have the right behaviours in place at the same time. You can have the best will in the world and, say wash your hands every 10 minutes, and you can get people, to be told to stand 4 meters apart. But if they're not complying with that, then it's not going to work. And we've found that the best way to do that is something which Welsh schools have already been doing, which is co-producing. Getting not only teachers, but also students where you can, involved in working out the best way for your school to mitigate against the dangers of transmitting COVID-19. It's going to be different for every school. Some have quite large classrooms, some small. Some have great ventilation, some have covered outdoor spaces. The safest thing to do in the hierarchy of controls is to eliminate the hazard by not being there. We'd like to slide down that to bringing people back into school, and that means we need to think about engineering controls and administrative controls, and finally PPE. PPE is the least effective of all of those methods, so let's look at some of the engineering controls. That's got to do with physical barriers. It's got to do with the way you physically set up your space so that people aren't coming into contact with each other. Some of the things you can do physically include perhaps propping open toilet doors so that there's not lots of high contact on that areas. Thinking about when you set up your hand hygiene stations. Thinking about whether or not you're going to have situations where you can keep windows open so that fresh air can circulate and get rid of any potential airborne viral particles. Those are really good, clear things you can do. Setting up your classes outside is best, but that's not going to be possible in the middle of winter. In administrative, we can think about things like, if it's going to be breathing on breathing, rather than saying everybody has to be 2 meters apart, can we get everybody to sit facing in the same direction so that no one's breathing onto another person's face but onto the back of their head? Might go back to looking a little bit like an old school, but it's going to be much safer that way. Some of the other things you can think about are, if you've got 2 doors going into a room, you could set up a one-way system so there's no chance of people bashing into each other. Running and shouting is going to be difficult. In fact, there are going to be some things that are going to be much harder. Singing and music is one of the things that makes a great expulsion of waterborne air that carries those heavy droplets, and you're going to need to think really carefully about how you can manage choir work so that people are singing away from each other and in a well-ventilated place. DT, things like that, usually have a degree of protective equipment anyway, but you're going to need to think about how you're going to avoid creating a load of aerosols. Things like jet washing and stuff are going to drive huge quantities of particles up into the air and add risk. So it's going to be different for everyone, but the best thing you can possibly do is think about what's right for your environment, think about what's right for your level of risk, and work together with staff and with children to get something that you can all agree to in order to be safe. There's operational guidance available on the Welsh Government website to help you with this, and it's important that you work together with your local authorities, with your unions and with each other